The reason I wanted to do an ethnographic study initially was which is speaking with people, having interviews and so on, is because most of the data is epidemiological. It's quantitative data. At the most, you phone people up and say, "Oh, when did you start using it?" You know? And that, to me, that doesn't tell you a lot of the meanings for drug use for these people. I wanted to understand why these people were using these substances. So these are the questions related to all these activities here. And the questionnaire I used after the interview. I waited at least a week. So I had an open-ended interview where I just sit down with people and say, "Well, look, you know, tell me what you're up to, what are you doing with cannabis," and they'd tell me stuff. And then a week later I'd come back and I'd say, "Okay, now we're going to do the questionnaire." And I did it that way around, so that I didn't signal my own interests up front. I wanted to get their views first, because it comes back to this notion of the user's voice being absent in this discourse. So I wanted to get these people's voices. I wanted to hear what they said, what they felt, and what they thought about the use of cannabis. So getting back to Erin's question, I put this ad in the newspaper, and it was quite funny actually. It was consecutive issues. The first week it went in next to an advertisement for a childcare centre, and I thought, oh God, I phoned them up and I said, "Oh geez guys, I don't think that's very cool, you know, this is in the community newspaper." And the second week it went in next to some sort of sex work ads and stuff like that. So it sort of basically covered the whole gamut really. I sort of figured that. Typically, I got 160 contacts in 4 weeks, and I converted half of those to actual interviews. And I wanted 80 people, so I was very satisfied with that. And when you think about it, that's quite incredible. In 4 weeks, 160 people contacted me about an illegal activity. Okay, and it says, "Do you use marijuana?" We're looking for volunteers. Just about the experiences and responses of marijuana users. So it's trying to keep it very neutral, very open.
But the way you worded that, people thought they were going to get smoked.
They did, and the phone. I had a cell phone, and the phone I left it kept it by my bed for the next 4 weeks, and it ran hot. I tell you. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, one morning, ran off and said, "Hey man, are you going to do that study?" I'm going, "Yeah, I'm doing the study." "Do you get any marijuana?" "No." "Bye." "Hello?" And so they were very enthusiastic about the idea that they might get some cannabis. It's not that kind of study, sorry. Hello.
Were you aware they were doing this type of thing in the 1970s at Otago University?
I do know that they did a little bit of stuff in it. There was also a study done in the late 60s, early 70s by a minister, I can't remember which faith he belonged to. He was an American. He did a master's on it. And it's a fantastic study. And to my knowledge, really, that between now and then, there's not a hell of a lot. And that was his name, McClellan, or Father McClellan, or something like this. And he did this fantastic study, went right through the country. And of course, the 1970s was a time when we had a much more open society. People were much more comfortable talking about these issues than they are now. So the notion of time, through time, going forward, equaling progress and openness and a greater democracy, perhaps, is something that might also want to question. Yeah, so we're getting a few of these statistics here. This is a goodness of fit test, which is a very basic set of statistics. The only major skew here was the proportion of female to male, 68% being male. And that, while a skew obviously away from the general population, is actually typical of a cannabis using population. It tends overall in this age group to be more male than female. It starts off even early on in life, and then it changes. So that was quite useful because it told us, well, look, we're looking at seemingly a generally typical cannabis population, so that's a useful statistic. And the other statistics in relation to education, proportionality of income, and so on, these were proportionate to the Dunedin population of the time. So there was a representativeness there. Similarly, although we've lost a little bit of our formatting here, unfortunately, but similarly in relation to full-time work, part-time work, we had a lot of students, over 20%. There were quite a lot of beneficiaries and unemployment people there, but at the time that was within the proportion of Dunedin. This was done in 2002. Since it's gone down, now it's coming up again. So at the time, that wasn't a major skew. Health workers and after them teachers were the most prominent professional groups in the study, participants in the study. So the health workers were the most likely of the professions to be using cannabis. One of the things was that everybody wanted to talk about it, and even through the process of the ethics application, there was people in the ethics committee putting their hand up saying, well, actually, there was people when I went to do the advertisement. Originally, it was I put a cannabis leaf there, that's sort of just the classic iconic cannabis leaf. And they said to me, because there's a group of people that organise this sort of thing in the university, they say, oh no, you can't have that, it's gratuitous. And I said, well no, it's iconic, you know, it represents, it's a sign, if you like, in relation to our previous conversation. Oh, well, we'll see what we can do. And the next thing, this comes back. I went, oh, that's a pretty, they call it bud porn. That's a pretty graphic image you've got there. And it turned out, of course, the person who was making the ad knew full well what they were doing. And on it went. Everybody I talked to along the process of improving and organising it, everybody had some story that they wanted to say. And so there was this notion of confession that came along. Suddenly these people were allowed to talk about something that they couldn't talk about before.
Was it a conscious decision to use the word marijuana rather than cannabis?
I did focus groups, and I asked them about that, and they said marijuana is better, cannabis is too much like the police would use. It was more of a technical term, and I mean I use it when I'm talking about cannabis, but we decided on marijuana because it was there's a heap of terms, but you know that. Now, there's this notion of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which our treatment people will know about, and it's essentially a mechanism by which it can be determined the level of dependence or abuse someone has associated with the use of a particular substance. And typically, if you say yes to 3 or more of these questions, you are described as dependent. This questionnaire that I used had actually combined the DSM with a European version of that, the ICD-10, International Classification of Diseases. And I think part of the problem was it was a lifetime, so it's ever, whereas the DSM is typically applied over 1 year. Is that correct? And they'd also combined these two very complicated instruments, which have taken a long time to get to the various criteria that they got to use to determine whether a person is dependent or not. Now, the reason I was interested in this was because the notion of dependence is a very powerful signifier, is that terrible word again, of the type of person. You know, I'll say, and of course, if you are described at some point in your medical health career as dependent, it's a lifetime diagnosis. You have always, at some point, you were dependent. And it's very hard to move away from that notion of having been dependent. Oh, well, you know, she was dependent on cannabis. You know, it's a very powerful idea that comes